A challenge, make the change. Honey, darling, what the tide will gather.
Well, welcome along again. I'm Matt Chorley, and this is How to Win an Election. With all remotes this week from various different parts of the world. We are joined as ever by Peter Mandelson. Peter, where are you in the world?
I am in Ditchley, North Oxfordshire.
So those enormous oil paintings behind you are not yours?
Not in my own home, no. Tragically not.
Good. Daniel Finkelstein, where are you?
I'm in Pinner, but I don't actually believe Peter. I think that those actually are his pictures. He just doesn't want anyone to think they're at his house.
Things really did get better under New Labour, Danny.
It'd be much grander if it really was Peter's house. And Polly, where are you in the world? Polly Mackenzie.
I'm on 43rd Street in Manhattan in a hotel room. Okay,
fine, you win. You're in New York, which Danny and I will be after we've set sail across the Atlantic this week, which is where we're off to on the Times and Sunday Times Cheltenham Literature Festival at Sea. So that's very exciting. Now, before we get on with what we're going to talk about this week, we've got a question from Catherine for you, Peter. Last week, you told us all about the story of how Gordon Brown invited you into Number 10, put aside your differences, having not spoken for 10 years, asked you to join his government. You explained you were called into the wood-panelled state dining room.
The small state dining room.
Only the small state dining room. And you were presented with a curly sandwich, a banana and a yoghurt. And Catherine says, did he eat the lacklustre lunch?
I ate everything bar the sandwich.
Oh, very good.
I couldn't face the sandwich, but the yogurt was delicious, and I was so hungry I had to eat the banana.
I'm incredibly impressed at the recall. I'm incredibly impressed at the recall, Matt, because that's exactly the sort of detail that I can't remember. And I remember going to the Hutton. I went to the Hutton inquiry for a day to write a sketch for the Times, and the main thing that I remember, the Hutton inquiry was on the David Kelly case. The main thing I remember was that all these people had incredible recall of what they were doing, exactly who they talked to, what they said, what they ate. I can't remember a single detail like that.
Danny, that is because they were incredibly drilled and rehearsed, down to the last comma. And believe me, a lot of preparation went into Hutton. I wasn't involved myself, Danny, you understand.
Maybe he didn't eat the yogurt, and we'll never know. That's the beauty of beauty. Just say it with confidence. Right, let's move on to this
anyway.
Week,
as we know, as I always said, New Labour was built on detail.
Or just saying things which weren't true with confidence. Right, let's move on to what we want to do this week. This week, obviously, the autumn statement this week is a great opportunity.
It wasn't that funny, Danny. It wasn't that funny.
It was very funny. Sorry, Peter.
It doesn't get much fun in Pinner. This week's autumn statement is a great opportunity for the parties to wheel out their slogans.
A government prepared to make long-term decisions so that we can build a brighter future.
Britain must, Britain can, Britain will get its future back.
It's the fair deal that British people deserve.
So those are the big three slogans that I suspect we'll hear a lot of this week from Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, but also Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and Ed Davey, and whoever speaks for financial matters for the Lib Dems. We'll never know. Before we come to the detail of those, Polly, do slogans matter?
I think they can matter. They probably don't really filter through to every single member of the electorate. But they're best when they actually encapsulate something that is distinctive about your platform. There's something about the ones that you've just shared that they feel quite samey. Like fairness is one of those words. I mean, who's not in charge of fairness, right? Like it's the long-term decisions. Much better, I think, when they crystallize a choice, an idea like that we're choosing to move forward, or that, in fact, at the 1929 general election, when my great-grandfather was elected as an MP in Berwick, the Conservatives had a slogan of safety first. Even that, right? It's a choice. And I think slogans are best when they encapsulate something meaningful that you're actually trying to say as a political party.
Well, we've done a little bit of polling on these slogans to see what the public think. So the long-term decisions for a brighter future, actually 40% of the public like that. It lands better with Lib Dems and Remainers than it does with Leavers. So that's the Conservative slogan. The flip side, let's get Britain's future back, Labour's slogan, 35% are positive about that, but much higher amongst Leave voters and people who voted Conservative in 2019. Half of 2019 Conservative voters like let's get Britain's future back. So it's interesting that, Peter, are they both addressing their weaknesses or are they identifying their target audiences?
Really, really important because they are Labour's target audience. I mean, I think that long-term decisions, frankly, I mean, it sounds like the title of an academic dissertation or the beginning of a submission by the civil service to a minister. I don't know how 40% like that. But the point about getting Britain's future back is that it does have some power. It has some emotion, and that's why it landed with its target audience.
So it's very interesting.
What do you think of the Danny
slogan? Well, it's very interesting that slogan works with Leavers because it's actually a failure of political analysis on my part. When you raised it with me on one of your programmes, Matt, I said I thought that it would appeal to Remainers who thought they'd lost their future with Brexit. But clearly the word back is important in that. And there's quite a lot of people who want anything back that they had before. It's a very strong emotion. I mean, all these slogans will have been tested. They won't be used unless they're tested. So they'll be tested in focus groups. They'll be tested quantitatively as well. So they'll know this, and that's why it is interesting that obviously Peter's right. That is a key market for Labour, and clearly they've tested it and discovered that market likes that slogan. But it's, you know, with the Tory slogan, long-term decisions, people like the idea of long-term decisions. I just note that they've ditched the long-term decision strategy they had at the party conference, or certainly the accompanying political strategy only after a few weeks. So it didn't turn out to be a long-term decision.
Yeah, I must admit, I was quite shocked because I remember us having that conversation, Danny. But yeah, about 30% of Remainers like let's get Britain's future back. 45% of Leavers, and it's almost exactly the opposite for the Tory one. Much more popular amongst Remainers than Leavers, so maybe there is that sort of sense of crossover. About 25% like for a fair deal for the Lib Dems, which is fine. 48% like the Green Party is a fairer, greener country. 29% like let's save Britain, which is the slogan of reform. But as you were saying, Polly, basically nobody knows who any of these belong to. Only about 1 in 5 could identify correctly the slogans for the main parties, Conservatives, Labour, a bit less of the Lib Dems. Everyone could spot a fairer, greener country belong to the Green Party because it's got the name of their party in it. What do you think then? Is there an argument, Polly, for just hammering away at slogans? But actually, you must have got sick of it when you were working in Number 10 for the Lib Dems. The Tories banging on about long-term economic plan to the point it became a sort of panto joke line. But clearly it worked in 2015. It was like we haven't finished the job. You know, Britain's on the right track. Don't turn back election for them.
Well, it's the core rule of communications, isn't it? When you are bored to the back teeth of saying something, that's when it maybe has started to filter through. It's the same with leafleting. You know, if you are getting pushback on the doorstep, don't you dare put any more leaflets through my door. Again, that's when perhaps you're starting to have delivered enough leaflets. So once you've landed on a message that works for people, you do have to get really boring and thorough about it. The long-term economic plan is 4 words. Long-term decisions for I can't even remember what the last words.
Future.
Brighter future. It's just too many words, isn't it? I'm not sure how you could hammer that without just getting your tongue. You know what I mean? You see? I can't even talk about it without turning it into a tongue twister. And you just know that people on the election campaign, they won't say brighter, they'll say fairer future, and then somebody will turn that into a controversy, and somebody will, it's too complicated.
The point, Matt, about a slogan at a party conference or an election is that it's got to enable you to turn it into a narrative. If you can make a speech around it, and if you can develop it and apply it to this policy or that, and if you can whip people up and the audience into a sort of emotion, that's why it's so important. You've got to make it perform for you.
But what then about, Danny, when we're looking at, we've got the autumn statement in the middle of this week, there's a tension, because if the Tory strategy is long-term decisions for a brighter future, steady as she goes, David Cameron's back, it's just like the good old days. Yet there's clearly pressure on Jeremy Hunt that they've got to do stuff now. So the long-term decision strategy might be, I think we can do tax cuts the year after next and the one after that, but lots of angry Tory MPs want things to happen now, and they want things that they're worried about rather than what the public are worried about, so it becomes inheritance tax and tax thresholds rather than the things which poll better. So there's a constant tension there. At this point in the cycle, do you think Jeremy Hunt should be doing the thing that keeps Tory MPs happy, or have they got to start that the dreadful phrase pitch rolling towards the general election and making sure that this message finally now hangs together?
The problem with the idea that you're going to make the decisions that no one has made for 30 years is there's usually a good reason why they didn't make them. And it's hardly likely that you've come along with a load of obvious things that everyone likes that are quite easy to make, but no one made them before you did, and suddenly it occurred to you to make them. And so I think that, the moment I heard that whole idea, that I thought to myself, well, that's going to be very difficult to find proof points of, and they've got a couple, and obviously HS2 was the most important of those, and then they had the smoking. But I wondered about the others. So actually, I'm not sure that it's going to even raise itself when Jeremy Hunt speaks, just because I wonder what it is that he can do in his spring statement that hasn't been done that nobody else thought of doing for 30 years, but was actually quite easy to do or possible to do. So I think probably the choosing of David Cameron, which makes the whole idea of making decisions that were not made for 30 years impossible to pursue, will be a moment where they'll quietly move away from that, which is what, of course, Peter predicted in the first of our podcasts.
And Peter, what do Labour need to do this week? Because we got quite a lot of policy actually from Rachel Reeves in a widely applauded speech at party conference. One suspects that for every proactive policy from the Tories, we'll probably see some traps left for Labour. Does Jeremy Hunt max out all the spending this year to put the squeeze on afterwards if Labour inherit the nation's finances? What message do Labour need to try and land?
Two messages. One, fiscal discipline, that they're going to be fiscally responsible, whatever the pressures. And secondly, that they have a plan for the future, that they're going to build. We're going to grow, and that we will do everything we can to raise levels of public and private investment, mainly private investment in the economy, because that's what's going to turn things around in the long term. Now, the trap I think the Conservatives may want to lay for Labour is over inheritance tax. And I somehow don't feel that is such a trap. I don't know what Labour would do in response to a future hypothecated cut in inheritance tax. It would be a promise for after the election, no doubt. I know people like George Osborne are very fond of saying, "Oh, no, this is a real teaser. It really, it goes under the surface. It gets the votes. It really tickles people. They feel a great sense of aspiration. And even if they're not rich enough ever to pay any inheritance tax, nonetheless, they aspire to be." I think things at the moment are just too serious, too dire. The cost of living pressures are too great. I just think people are finding day-to-day living a struggle. And the idea that they might, sometime in the future aspire to paying inheritance tax and therefore will vote in favour of a projected cut in it is too far-fetched. I don't think it is a trap.
What do you think, Polly? Do you think they will or won't do it? It feels to me like there's a judgment here about, do they want to prop up their support with the public or with Tory MPs who do fret about inheritance tax? I think it's very important. Even though there was a quote in the Sunday Times a few weeks ago, there was a story around this, where a sort of special advisor or source said the quiet bit out loud. They said nobody actually really pays inheritance tax, but everyone is worried that they might. So that's why they should do something about it, even though it actually costs them loads of money, even though most people wouldn't be caught by it anyway. What do you think?
I think there's a ghost here, which is the ghost of when George Osborne announced that big inheritance tax cut policy and sort of scared Gordon Brown out of holding an early general election whilst he was still really popular. And so the Conservatives sort of deeply believe that this is the way, both to appeal to voters and to somehow lay a really clever elephant trap for the Labour Party. Just because it appeals to Conservative MPs, that doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing in sort of tactical terms, because holding your party together, your team together, so that you can campaign effectively is in fact a really important thing to do for success in an election campaign. But it still does need to work for voters, and it does feel, I think Peter's right, a bit like an indulgence. Plus, the reality is that it's terrible policy. We have a hugely divided society. £1 trillion or so is going to be passed on from the generation in their kind of 70s and 80s, probably to people in their 50s and 60s. It's sort of deeply unhelpful economic impact of that. And of course, what it means is that increasingly people who are able to inherit from their family will have good lives, and people who don't have access to that £1 trillion. Increasing divide, and that causes enormous harms for all of us. So the indulgence of doing this sets them on the path to, probably much more harmful situation for the actual country in the future, which is the thing that really irritates me the most about it.
Danny, what do you think? Will they go for long-term decisions for a brighter future or short-term traps for Labour to fall into?
I think it'll be actually kind of neither, really. I don't think that there are very many things they can do that were such big traps for Labour, and I don't think there are very many things that are available that are long-term decisions that haven't been made for 30 years that they're suddenly going to make. As I said, I think they'll end up doing things that slump somewhat in the middle. I rather think inheritance is a budget measure. Maybe it is a spring statement, an autumn statement measure, and goes with the spending plans. But we'll see. There's been heavily reported, obviously. But I do wonder about that. But I don't. So I think that they're going to end up doing sort of quite steady things that head in the direction they want to go without being very dramatic.
Well, we wait and see. Obviously, the autumn statement happening on Wednesday. Up next, we'll focus more on slogans. What's the best and actually, more importantly, worst slogan you've come across? And are slogans better when you set them to music? We've got some of the best campaign anthems of, well, actually, the dim and distant past, because they don't do them anymore. Maybe we should start a campaign to bring them back. Listener David Murphy emailed in. Says, this question probably isn't very enlightening. Well, we'll be the judge of that, David, but it could be entertaining. What is the worst slogan the panel has come across? I'll get the ball rolling with two, both from the centre-right and both from 2005. The Conservatives, Are You Thinking What We're Thinking? Which, of course, was Michael Howard's. And the Ulster Unionists, Decent People, Vote Ulster Unionist. I'd also like to give an honourable mention to Tim Lemon, the Ulster Unionist candidate in East Belfast in 2001, whose slogan was, the future's bright, the future's lemon. Can the panel think of worse slogans than those? How important are slogans? We've talked a little bit about how important slogans are. Danny, given your... I don't think you are to blame, actually, for the two. You were involved in 2005, and Are You Thinking What We're Thinking, were you?
So I think that is actually an excellent slogan. It's just not a very good campaign. So what slogans do is they summarise what you want the campaign to be about, what your basic message is, what your presumption is about the electorate. And the Conservative Party in 2005 ran a campaign in which they put forward a number of sort of simple propositions about crime and the economy and migration, and they felt that those kind of that directness would win an election. I was by that point already of the view that wasn't going to be successful. Michael had believed very strongly it could be, and he found a slogan that summarised it very well. The problem was that people probably weren't thinking quite those things. And so I thought, and a bit like the other slogan, which was about the Democratic Unionist Party, it certainly summarises what they think about themselves and maybe what some of their voters think about. So I think we have to distinguish between a bad slogan and a bad idea for a campaign. As a bad slogan, I would say the 1983 Labour slogan, which was "Think positive, act positive, vote Labour." Correct me if I've got that slightly wrong, Peter, but I think that's right. I think that
positive,
that isn't even
act
grammatical.
positive, vote positive.
Vote positive. Well, it's.
I think it's a very persuasive recommendation in favour of Michael Foot. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm not sure it. So I think it was really quite a poor slogan, because I'm not sure what it means. And as my friend Andrew Cooper, Lord Cooper now, kept saying, it's not even grammatical. He really bored me all the way through that campaign by continually going on about that.
Danny, isn't the 2005 Michael Howard slogan, are you thinking what we're thinking? Wasn't that rather a sly way of trying to inject the issue of race and immigration into the campaign? If you remember, there was a slowly mounting drumbeat that gathered pace during the Conservatives' campaign, which was only then seen off, I think, in week 3 or 4 by a trenchant speech by Tony Blair when he went to Dover, and he answered and took the arguments about immigration head on. And that was the end of Michael Howard's sly attempt to inject race into the campaign.
Well, it wasn't a sly attempt. I mean, it was completely open. That was one of the things that they
full frontal.
It was one of the things that they were talking about. And by the way, it's obviously a legitimate issue, and it's perfectly reasonable to discuss it. So it wasn't sly. As it happens, I dissented from the centrality it had in the campaign. And interestingly enough, and so in that way, I would agree with you. But in that, and interestingly enough, David Cameron did too, and it produced actually a slight distancing between David Cameron and Michael Howard during that campaign, because he basically refused to put the emphasis on immigration that Michael Howard wanted him to.
That's a definition of a bad election slogan, one that divides your party rather than unites it and sends it into battle.
Well, it's not a definition of a bad slogan. And one of his frontbenchers and former SPADs comes out against it. That's probably not a great sign.
The important thing to distinguish, Peter, is it's the thing that I'm trying to distinguish between is a bad slogan and a bad choice of campaign. This is an extremely good piece of slogan work, capturing the very essence of what Michael Howard wanted to say. It's just that I don't think he was trying to say the right things, and that's what. So the thing that's the difference between the 1983 slogan was just a sort of terrible salad of words that didn't really mean anything. So the other slogan, the slogan that Labour used in the 2005 election, I believe, which was "Forward, not back." That's a very good slogan, because what it was doing was adopting economic growth and saying, keep on with us. It's a Britain's on the right track, don't turn back slogan. Britain will keep going forward with us. The forward doesn't have any value, because I mean, obviously we're going to keep going forward. It's like we must progress into the future. I mean, we all progress into the future. But it captured at least something that Labour was trying to say.
The comparable short, sharp, sweet slogan was the Conservatives in 2010. Do you remember that? It was 3 words: vote for change. It was. Not only does it sort of give you something that you sort of feel that you need to do, but the next morning it makes you feel good about having voted for it. You voted for change. You get up in the morning and you think, yes, I did it. It was a good thing to have done. Now, as it happens, they didn't actually win. They just made sure that we lost. But
sound like Jeremy Corbyn. It sounds like Jeremy Corbyn, Matt, saying he won the 2017 election.
Polly, I want to bring you in, because your rule that 5 words was too many. When you were in number 10, after 5 years of the coalition, the Lib Dems went into the election with stronger economy, full stop, fairer society, full stop, opportunity for everyone, which that's even more words than the words that you said were too many, and that was your doing.
Well, I mean, not directly my personal doing, just to be clear. I was more on the 30,000 words of the manifesto. But so often, when it doesn't make sense, it's because you're trying to stitch together a coalition of people who don't really agree with each other. And that's where Danny's right about, the 2005 Michael Howard slogan is simply that it crystallized in a coherent way everything that they were trying to say. The Liberal Democrats 2015 were unable to crystallize everything they were trying to say in a few short words because we were unsure really what we were trying to say and trying to hold together a lot of very wounded, fragile people and messages. And obviously it didn't work.
Yeah, Matt, on the Polly principle of 3 words are better than 5, the most brilliant Conservative slogan ever was in 1978-79. Labour isn't working. I mean, in 3 words, you had Britain is broken. You can do something about it by voting these people out. You can vote instead for competence, and you'll feel much better about it when you wake up the following morning. I mean, it started in 78, not 79, and it went on. And by the way, kept rolling on against us during the 80s and into the 90s. We were still campaigning against and doing something about that slogan, even in the 1990s. That's how good it was.
I mean, it's also a clever pun. That's the other reason it's good.
Yeah, I remember in the 1997 general election, we kept on being presented with adverts from our communication team, and they would always unveil them with "This is the new Labour isn't working." Some of these adverts, I'm afraid, were really poor. There was an extraordinary one with a picture of Tony Blair and a phone bill. And the slogan was Tony and Bill. It was a play on Tony Blair and Bill Clinton. It was completely incomprehensible. And each one of these quite incomprehensible often adverts was said to be the new Labour isn't working. But interestingly enough, the slogan that we did end up with became quite well known in that election, which was New Labour, New Danger, 1997. The problem with that slogan was that although it summarised the idea of the campaign, we could never agree what the new danger was, because the part of the idea was, there'd be a new danger on Europe, but Ken Clarke didn't want that. So it did, Peter said earlier about the splitting the party, it did split the party. So I think there's a different, New Labour, New Danger, I think, is a clever slogan, but it's a complicated campaign.
You remember what happened to it, though, Danny?
Yes.
You remember what happened to that? It wasn't actually 1997, it was 1996. And it was launched on August the 1st, a great sort of artillery bombardment of the Labour Party in that summer. And advertising hoardings across the country were bought up by the Conservative, and you had these Blair with these sort of demon eyes coming out of these posters, New Labour, New Dangers, and it was of course about the reality behind New Labour. The reality behind Blair is something you've got to be frightened of, and I must say I was a bit frightened. I was sort of the campaign director. I was at Millbank at the time. Everyone else, of course, had gone off on holiday. Tony was in Tuscany and Alistair was in the south of France, and I was just left there manning the barricades against what was an almighty great bombardment. And I said to them, we have got to find a bishop to denounce this advertising campaign.
Yeah, I remember
these demon eyes. And after a long search, we turned up, thank goodness we did, the Bishop of Oxford, who described the advertising campaign as satanic, and it was dead in the water from that moment on.
I was shown this advert. I was shown this advert because every time that you do an advert, the director of research, which is what I have, has to be shown any policy content to ensure that you're happy to say those things, that you sign off that the claim is true. And I was shown this, and I remember telling Steve Hilton, who showed it to me, I said to him, you know what, I'm a bit worried about this. I don't want to win a prize for an advert and lose in a landslide. And both of those things happened.
But by the way, Matt,
Yeah.
this was the New Labour, New Dangers was completely knocked for six in any case by the best slogan in the history of the Labour Party, which was New Labour, New Britain. But the story behind that, by the way, is that it was nearly killed at birth. It was in 1994, not 1996 or 1997. And it was coined to coincide with Tony's first big party conference speech, when, of course, he was going to unveil his decision, his desire to rewrite Clause 4 of the party's constitution. But there was a big argument about it and whether we should go with it or not, because some people were very nervous and thought it was a bit audacious, it's a bit premature, it's a bit presumptuous to just sort of describe suddenly a Labour Party which had only been in, with a leadership by Tony Blair of only a couple of months, as New Labour, New Britain. Eventually, I remember we got to about a couple of weeks before the party conference when it was going to be unveiled. And a woman called Jackie Stacey, who was the queen then of Labour Party conference presentation, phoned me up in complete anguish and said, I cannot get a final sign-off from the leader's office from this. Blair's team seem to be divided. Those who like it, those who don't. Those who think it's too risky, those who think we should go with it. You've got to take a decision. So I said, well, Jackie, what do you think? You know, well, I like it. I said, fine. I'll tell Tony he should have it and we'll go with it. But then there was another argument about whether the N in the new should be capital N or lowercase n. I kid you not. This went on for another 24 hours. Tony was a capital N man. He wanted capital N New Labour, capital N New Britain. And I said, no. It's a bit presumptuous. That is going too far. We'll have a lowercase n and a lowercase n, and we only changed it to an uppercase n in 1997. New Labour, new life for Britain.
Polly, could I invite you to heap praise on Dominic Cummings? That in actually the thing that he is very good at. Clearly, it's not running a government, but nailing down, take back control, get Brexit done. Take back control was up against. Can you remember the Britain Stronger in? I mean, even Britain Stronger in Europe is a terrible name for a campaign against vote leave. Do you remember what the Britain Stronger in Europe slogan was?
No.
Stronger, safer, and better off. Again, because they couldn't really decide. Is it strength? Yeah. Is it safety? Is it? But actually, it is a huge skill. Take back control, get Brexit done. Phrases that you didn't enjoy, but they capture, in part because they're the sort of things that a normal person would say, rather than the sort of gobbledygook of a whiteboard session which has got out of hand.
I mean, that's exactly right, isn't it? It's got to have two things. One, it's got to genuinely sort of be the laser point of all that you're trying to say, and it's got to be in real human speak. And so few slogans manage to achieve that. And if you can capture it, you can then, you dominate the whole of the election campaign. Get Brexit done was amazingly clever because for those people who wanted Brexit, it was a promise that it would happen. But for those people who sort of didn't care, or frankly were just sick of the entire thing toxifying and distracting us from all of the important stuff like how to run the economy or how to make the NHS operate properly, it was just a promise that this conversation would be over. And that's what's magical, right? Is if you can get two actually opposing groups of people to somehow feel a sense of connection in the same sort of words.
But also feel a sense of emotional power. Yeah. I mean, that's why Obama's "Yes, we can" was so brilliant. And, when you voted for that, you woke up the next day feeling really brilliant. And then Trump's "Make America Great Again." I mean, who couldn't vote for it? Who would be against making America great again? It just makes you feel wonderful just in the act of voting for it.
But they're also really good because they are calls to action, right? Like there's an active verb in there. Yeah. Make, vote for change. It's the idea of you as the voter being mobilised for positive change, and that's very inspiring for getting out the vote. And so often in these real change elections, you will see a change in the number of people who feel mobilised to vote, and those active verbs I think are really valuable for that.
I suppose "Let's Get Britain's Future Back" is it's trying to find, in that slipstream, take back control, make America great again. And that's maybe why Labour are landing with the Leave voters. That similar thing. And I was thinking, why has nobody used "Make Britain Great Again"? I thought to myself. It turns out the National Front used it in the 1975 EEC referendum. And I suppose that's another thing, is if you're going to come up with a slogan, you'll suddenly think that sounds good, and it'll turn out that someone else has used it. Obviously, hopefully not the National Front. But I suppose that's always a risk.
Matt, I think we're letting David down because we haven't talked enough about bad political slogans. I would like to propose a really bad political slogan for my own constituency, which is Dulwich and West Norwood, DAWN. It's just itching for somebody to campaign for a new dawn, right? But my first general election was 2005, and the Liberal Democrats then, they did really well, right? That was their absolute peak. So maybe slogans don't matter enormously, but the slogan then was just 10 reasons to vote Liberal Democrat. I mean, if you really can't crystallize your campaign at all, it's just kind of a list of 10 things. It's such a symbol for me of what the Liberal Democrats were at that time, which was just a coalition of good, strong local candidates, kind of saying different things in all of those different constituencies. And I guess the slogan was good in Danny's way, because it was a perfect manifestation of what the party was trying to say, which was lots of different things in lots of different ways.
If Neil Kinnock had been in charge of that campaign, it would have been 11 good reasons to vote for Labour.
Shall I tell you the first time I ever got into real trouble with Neil Kinnock?
Go on then, before we move on.
It was in 1986. I'd been campaign director since the previous autumn, and we were going to completely overhaul the communications of the Labour Party, completely new look, launch a whole new campaign in April 1986. And Neil Kinnock said, "Very good, kid, I want this campaign to be Labour's campaign for freedom and fairness. That's what its slogan has got to be." I said, "Fine, Neil, I'll take that away and I'll deliver you a campaign." And I went to some advertising people, and they turned Labour's campaign for freedom and fairness into putting people first. I went back with the campaign a week before it's launched to Neil Kinnock, and I showed him the wonderful visuals of the entire thing. He said, "But Peter, there's something gone wrong." He said, "I can't see Labour's campaign for freedom and fairness." I said, "Oh, no, Neil. No, we've converted that into Labour, putting people first." He said, "No. I want Labour's campaign for freedom and fairness." So what I did was overprint every single poster, leaflet, printed visual of the entire campaign in small letters around the edge, printed and published by Labour's campaign for freedom and fairness. And he came away happy. The thing was an incredible, resounding success, and I've never seen him happier.
Well, apart from when it met the voters, it was less of a success, Peter.
That was in 1987, and that wasn't a bad outcome, if you remember, because we saw off the SGP Liberal Alliance, and it was a battle for our survival, and we won. I mean, we won our survival. We didn't win the campaign. It was the Red Rose glitz and glamour campaign, and it's what Private Eye described as Labour's brilliant election defeat.
I'm just going to, before we move on, I just want to throw into the mix of the worst campaign for the 2015 election. The DUP's slogan was "Step Not Back." And I don't know what "Step Not Back." I don't know what it means, but anyway, there we are. Right, up next, are slogans even better when you set them to music? We've had another email in from this. We've had another email in. This is from Charlie. Charlie O'Neill says, there's a question for all three. What is the effect of an election campaign song? Do they add much to a campaign? Pretty much everyone remembers things can only get better. So should any party hoping to be re-elected or elected next year think about adopting one? Thank you, Labour Party activist and Peter Mandelson superfan who knew such a thing existed. Wow. But we found him. He's called Charlie O'Neill. There we are. There's one. Which got us thinking, and we'll talk a bit about things can only get better and how that came about in a moment, Peter, but it got us thinking about election songs. And Polly, you in particular have got
a deep
song.
Personal trauma.
Yes. So We'll kick off with this. This is from the 2010 Lib Dem election campaign. This is We'll Be the Change.
We'll be the change. We'll be the change. We'll build a fairer room and make a change for you. We'll be the change. We'll be the change. We'll be the change that works for you. We'll be the change. We'll be the change.
Come on, Polly. Polly, you're not joining in and singing.
Look,
This is so terrible.
This is
doesn't even scan, right? Like,
Peter, do you like it?
This is a complete rip-off of my 1989 Birmingham Rally European elections triumph when we launched our policy review, which we called Meet the Challenge, Make the Change.
Don't worry, Peter, I've got it. Let me just change the record on the record
Have you?
player.
Have you got it?
Here we go.
I love it. This was... I mean, isn't it absolutely wonderful? I don't know. Yes, it is.
No.
I'd love to know, Matt, the kid who sang that in 1989 in Birmingham. I'd love to know what happened to him. He was absolutely brilliant.
Can you remember his name?
His name's gone out of my head. I'm sorry,
we'll try and find Daddy. But let's just. No. So we then asked Daddy to recommend a song, and Daddy chose one from the 2001 general election. Because Mike Batt, best known for writing the Wombles theme tune, was called in by William Hague's campaign. Now, honestly, this is the most intense investigative journalism I've done in a very long time trying to get hold of this. I ended up having to contact Mike Batt himself because he was the only person who still had a copy of it. And he said we could play it on condition that we make clear he doesn't support any political party anymore. And this is purely an historical relic to share with the nation. So this is, well, it was called Heartland, and then I think it was then renamed Gravitas in the hope that he could sell it on to other people and people wouldn't remember it was. So this is a magic. This is the Action Man version. This is William Hague in full Action Man mode. Now, sadly, there are no lyrics to this. It's just got sort of end of game show vibes. Say goodnight, everybody. Danny, what is it about this song you think that didn't swing it for William Hague in 2001?
I mean, I think, as it happens, I do genuinely think Mike Batt is a genius. And I think this is brilliant, this piece of music. But when it was presented to me, I was told we're really lucky. The man who is behind Bond, the group, has made us some music. And I said, isn't that Mike Batt? And Amanda Patel said to me, yes, it is. And I said, everyone's just going to say, we've got the music from the Wombles, obviously. And that is exactly indeed what happened. So it just goes to show how much optimism there can be in politics, that people would think that. It's interesting. I've now, having listened to Meet the Challenge, Make the Change, Peter, I've got a new theory about why you lost the 1992 election unexpectedly at the last minute. It wasn't Neil Kinnock's rally speech. It was the music.
They remembered the music from 1989. Matt, please send it to me. It means so much to me because we went on to win the European elections in 1989. It was the first time Labour had won a national election since 1979. That's how big it was.
And it was all down to Meet the Challenge, Make the Change. Now, what about Things Can Only Get Better, as flagged by Charlie? Because actually, most people, if we asked them what was the slogan of 97, they wouldn't say New Labour, New Britain. They'd say Things Can Only Get Better.
Yeah, they would. I mean, Fred, I don't know whose brilliant discovery it was, whose idea it was, but it certainly put us into a very, very much better groove than the one we'd been in the 1980s, when, if you remember, Billy Bragg, and singing songs about socialism, which certainly cheered up the party membership, provided us with our lyrics. But things can only get better. Thank you very much, Dereem. And it's still played. It's the anthem of New Labour. I mean, it's still played at party conferences, Christmas parties, and weddings, including my own, by the way.
And George Osborne
played at your wedding.
Yep. And George Osborne's. The moment the registrar pronounced us, married, he struck up. Things can only get better.
Polly, did you have "Will Be the Change" at your wedding?
No, I did have Nick Clegg at my wedding. I think it was the vicar's happiest moment, not when Nick Clegg turned up at his church, but when the security people came to check out the church beforehand. That was very exciting. And Nick, egregiously for the environment, arrived at my wedding by helicopter. He had to interrupt a rugby match on what's called the Grow, which is the big field in my hometown of Bilth-Wells, in order to land his helicopter. But amazingly enough, the rugby players were delighted and shook his hand, and then went back to their match once the helicopter had gone.
I didn't have any politicians at my wedding. I did have a letter from Gordon Brown, one from David Cameron, one from Jeremy Brown, who was then the Lib Dem MP for Taunton, and a postcard from Timmy Mallet. So I think overall I probably win.
You made the challenge. Peter, I wanted to ask you about Meet the Challenge, Make the Change. So we all understand the Make the Change, and had that been the slogan. But what was the challenge, and why were people supposed to meet it?
The challenge was burying nationalisation and unilateralism, which we did at the end of the policy review in 1989. Before we had to do so again with, knobs on.
It was for the party.
5-6 years later under Tony Blair.
It was for the party.
We had to keep reminding them it was for the party, but it was also getting a message to the public. And it sort of landed, but it landed when it was turbocharged a few years later under Tony Blair and New Labour, New Britain.
Well, I think that we should start a campaign now to bring back the election song. I think it's the thing that we've been missing from just to see. If anything, we should get Keir Starmer to readopt Meet the Challenge, Make the Change, because Peter, I've never seen Peter look so happy than when we were playing that.
It was brought back such great memories. I don't know. I think it was I was going to say it was a tonic for the nation. Actually, it was a tonic for me, and I loved it. Still do. Please send it to me.
We should make the leaders themselves sing the campaign song, though. I mean,
yes.
The 2010 Lib Dem song was actually sung by the Lib Dem choir, which was a bunch of staff who gathered together. I'm not sure if just in the headquarters or in a recording studio, but it would have been much better if we'd made Nick Clegg sing it. And we could just turn the whole election campaign really into something that's a bit more like Britain's Got Talent.
Yeah. In 1979 election, when they had that rally where Kenny Everett said, "Let's kick Michael." It's 1983. It must have been. "Let's kick Michael Foot's stick away." Wasn't there a
stick
song?
Away, yeah. And then "Let's bomb Russia."
That's right. And then wasn't there a song about Margaret Thatcher that was sung by Vince Hill? It was Maggie, Maggie, Maggie of some kind.
Maggie is a Yeah, that's right.
I can't now remember that.
We'll try and dig that out. Well, we're going to end this week on a musical note because everyone's obviously been enjoying the How to Win an Election theme tune, and some listeners got in touch and said, could they have the music so they could do their own version? And we've heard from a jazz group, Nathan and Lorenzo. They are the Soho Live Studios Composer Collective. And they play regularly at the Piano Bar in Soho. They've done two versions of us. George Hudson sent this in. They sent in one which basically sounds exactly like our official theme song, if possibly slightly better, because I had more instruments. But they've done us a chill-out version. So if anyone wants to get in touch and they want the music, they can email us howtowin@thetimes.co.uk. howtowin@thetimes.co.uk. If you want to send in your send us your email address and we can send you the sheet music. So here we are. This is How to Win an Election Chill Out Mix. It does sound a bit like what we say when one of us dies. At the end of the tribute episode before we move on and quickly replace you.
I'm not sure that it's got enough emotional punch, Matt.
Is that what? Is that what? Right, very good. If you want to get in touch, you can email us howtowin@thetimes.co.uk. howtowin@thetimes.co.uk.
A challenge, make the change. I need what the tide will gather. What? I love that. Oh, please send it.
I will. I'll send it to you. If you know who sang that at the original Labour Party conference, to get in touch. howtowin@thetimes.co.uk. Thanks so much for listening. I've been Matt Chorley with Polly Mackenzie, Daniel Finkelstein, and Peter Mandelson. That was How to Win an Election.